A big matchup on Thursday Night Football with the Washington Commanders looms large for the Philadelphia Eagles, but they need to make sure they do not overlook Cooper Rush and a desperate Dallas Cowboys football team.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Wednesday edition of the podcast. We're brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our code in all lowercases LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly. All you got to do is play $5. Eagles Cowboys this Sunday at 4:25, and it's a matchup that I think the vibes are pretty good. The Eagles have won 4 straight games to get to 6-2. Barely make it out alive against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but a lot of good things to feel great about on the field when it comes to the personnel on offense, defense, even special teams. Coaching is where the concern continues for the Eagles, but overall, the vibes are high on a 4-game win streak, and this is like a big race in the NFC East. For the first time in years, there are 2 stud teams in this division. Like every single year, the division is fairly competitive, right? Outside of the, one-off of 2022 or 2017 or Dallas in 2016. Like it feels like every 5 years, one of these teams in the division becomes a juggernaut for a season. But normally there aren't 2 teams that are like at the top of the conference. It's always competitive because most years all of these teams, or at least, 2 or 3, are battling for a 9 to 10 win division title. You look at, the last time there was a big match between the Eagles and Cowboys for the division, like a big one at the end of the year was 2019. There's a reason this division changes hands pretty much every year. They haven't had a repeated champ since the Eagles over 15 years ago, actually going on 20 years now. So overall, it's competitive, but it's not like this year where the Washington Commanders are 7-2 and the Eagles are 6-2, looking at 7-2 right in the face with Cooper Rush starting for the Dallas Cowboys this week. So it's a win that the Eagles need to get to continue to stack, get to 7-2 and keep pace with Washington with that Thursday night matchup coming up next week. But they can't overlook Dallas. Obviously, again, Washington's legit. I told everybody in May, and I was right, Washington is going to be a bigger problem than Dallas, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well with Jayden Daniels. And that has come to fruition. They traded for Marshawn Lattimore yesterday for a 3rd-round pick. The pick actually the Eagles gave Washington for Jahan Dotson in the offseason. So Washington's going all in, and they are legit. I know their schedule's been pretty easy, but Jayden Daniels, I think, is not only the favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, but I think he's a legitimate MVP candidate. So that's a legit team, and that's a massive matchup coming up next week. Again, it's one of the biggest NFC East games the Eagles have had in quite some time. But again, you need to make sure you take care of business against Dallas. You have to continue to stack wins because Washington is 7-2. You don't want to fall to 6-3, and then suddenly, obviously next week feels like a must-win situation anyway, but if you lose against Washington, suddenly you're down 2 games for the NFC East lead. And you don't want to think that way. Obviously, I think they're going to be favored to beat the Commanders, and I still think they're better than Washington, despite how good they've been this year and over, exceeded expectations. But at the same time, take care of business against the Cowboys. And it might be easy to say, yeah, obviously it's a trap game. They're not going to overlook them, though. A trap game is made up by fans and the media. I'm making this point for a reason because last week against Jacksonville, this team got comfortable, and it almost became a trap game. Lane Johnson himself said after the game he thought there were concentration issues with the Eagles in the second half. He thought it should have been a 40-plus point performance from the offense. It should have been a complete blowout, but the whole team felt like they already had done that in the second and third quarter, and that is led by Nick Sirianni. Like, Sirianni was the top guy that was acting like they were winning by 40 points. So it might seem obvious what I'm talking about. There's an easy game, or it feels like an easy game on paper right before the big matchup. And, players don't overlook it. They all take it one day at a time. And, trap games are, just created narratives by the media and by fans. I don't think so. I think in this situation, this can absolutely be a trap game. It showed you last week that it is a real thing. And so they need to make sure, Cooper Rush is playing in this football game. No Dak Prescott, who's out with a hamstring injury. He'll be on short-term IR, it looks like, for Dallas. Going to miss at least a month of football. CeeDee Lamb also has an AC joint sprain, so his status is up in the air this week. It's very easy to say the Eagles are just going to blow the Dallas Cowboys out of the water. And they need to, and they need this win to keep pace with Washington, and that's a huge matchup coming up. And it's this is setting up for that big primetime matchup. But again, you really, really need to make sure you take this one day at a time and make sure you take care of business against the Cowboys. Cooper Rush again starting. He's 5-1 as a starter over the last 3 years for the Cowboys when Prescott's not playing. That one loss did come against the Eagles back in 2022. I will say, Dallas's misery, it brings me, and I'm sure all of you, a lot of joy. Right? I mean, and again, a lot of it this year has been injuries. I don't think the Cowboys are as bad as they've played over the last few games. But at the same time, they weren't going to be great this year. There's a reason I said in May I think Washington's going to be better. Jerry Jones has completely settled for good, not great, for almost mediocrity. And they're just so... It makes me appreciate Howie and Lurie's lack of complacency. Like, even though you guys know I have issues with... Sometimes I think they're too hands-on in certain areas and power-driven, but it's nowhere near Jerry Jones in that way. And the good thing is, I'd rather have an aggressive GM and an aggressive owner that wants to make change, even if they try to do it themselves, than an owner in Jerry Jones that pretty much said, GG, like, this is the core, even though it's in their DNA now. This current Cowboys core is coded to choke. I mean, they've been doing it for 5 years now with their head coach, Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott's been doing this for 8 years. I mean, this whole era of Cowboys football is underperforming and losing in the first or second round of the playoffs. The fact that Jerry Jones, number one, took forever, was so reactive in his contract extensions, but then still handed out extensions to guys that maybe shouldn't have got them, like Dak Prescott. He kept Mike McCarthy for another year, and that scheme is archaic. I mean, I'm watching, it's 2nd and 10, and they're throwing the ball. They're going under center, 7-step dropbacks, running tight end out routes that are only 3 yards off the line of scrimmage. I mean, what the Dallas Cowboys are doing is completely archaic, and it's complacent, and it definitely makes me appreciate the Eagles brass and how they run things for sure. So I think the Cowboys this year, reality kind of hitting them right in the face and catching up to them, it definitely brings us a whole lot of joy in Philadelphia for sure. And I think the Eagles should, the way they're clicking, especially the way Jaylen Herz is playing right now, they should dominate this game. A.J. Brown has a good chance of playing as well. No structural damage to his MCL with that injury against the Jaguars, so they might be at full strength. The Cowboys will not be. Just do not overlook this football team. Again, you could kind of roll your eyes at that, and it sounds like a cheesy football narrative, but the Eagles overlooked the Jacksonville Jaguars in the second half of the game on Sunday. They got comfortable. Their head coach got comfortable. That got the rest of the roster comfortable. And Lane Johnson himself noticed that and said they had concentration issues. You can't have that 2 weeks in a row. This is a very important game to keep pace with Washington, and that sets you up for a massive Thursday night matchup the following week against the Commanders. Nick Sirianni, though, he is very important in that way. He's also very important when it comes to in-game decisions. I went play-by-play back to the film against the Jaguars to see if I actually agreed or disagreed with his 4th down and 2-point conversion decisions that are getting a lot of flack over the last few days, especially from Gino and I on this podcast. I did go back play-by-play and see if I agreed or I disagreed a few days removed from that game. So we'll go into that breakdown coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Eagles fans, you guys remember our great partners over at Ultimate Pro Football GM. Well, they're back, and they have added an amazing new game mode that I need to tell you about. The game that has you step into the shoes of a football franchise GM and lead it to glory now has a head coach career mode. So on top of getting to build your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring coaching staffs, now you also get to call offensive plays during games as well. Additionally, you'll dig the new tools. You can work with such things as individual training camps and upgraded negotiation systems. So this fun, realistic game just got a whole lot better. If you already have it installed, be sure to do an update so you can try out the new mode. If you don't have it yet, download it right now. It's a must-have for all football fans. I love it, and I know you'll love it too. Ultimate Football GM is completely free, has no ads, and it's 100% playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage you'll want in creating a dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM, start your dynasty today. Guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is also sponsored by PrizePick. PrizePick is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, PrizePick has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePick. So if you think A.J. Brown will get more than, let's say, 83.5 receiving yards next week, hammer that with Jaylen Herz as well, getting more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. Cook up some hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season. Again, you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Head over to the App Store, download the app today, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Eagles Cowboys this Sunday at 4:25. We got you covered with more on that matchup tomorrow. Crossover Thursday with Marcus Moser of the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Again, the Eagles cannot overlook Dallas. This is a prototypical trap game where you have a inferior opponent that has an injured quarterback, an injured star receiver. They're reeling right now on a 2-3 game losing streak. Multiple games under 500 now. They are falling out of the NFC East race. You have that big matchup coming up on primetime football, a short week next Thursday against the 7-2 Washington Commanders, led by Jaden Daniels. That is exactly how you define a trap game. They need to make sure that they take care of business and they don't get complacent like they did in the second half against Jacksonville. And again, that complacency was really bred from their head coach, Nick Sirianni, who I thought got arrogant when it comes to in-game decisions. I thought the decisions to when to kick a field goal, when to go for it on 4th down, when to take the 2-point conversion, the play calls themselves in those situations, they just didn't really make much sense at the time of the game. But again, I wondered, was that just the heat of the game, and because the plays didn't work, was I just being a prisoner of the moment? So I did go back and did a play-by-play breakdown of each decision Sirianni made that's getting criticism from that game against Jacksonville. And I'm not going to lie, watching back, I disagree with the decisions as much as I did during the game. There wasn't a single decision where I liked both the call to go for it or to kick it and the play design. Like, there were times I understood why Nick made the decision he did, but then I hated the play design. There were times that I liked the play design, but I didn't think it made sense to go for it in that situation. That was just the fact of the matter. I mean, if you look at every single one of them, there's the first one. 4th and 3, you're up 10 on the opposing 20-yard line in the second quarter. I'm cool with that decision to go for it, to be aggressive. You have one of the most talented offenses in the entire NFL. You only need 3 yards. You're up 10. Sure, get aggressive. You're in Jaguars territory. Go for the touchdown, not for the field goal. Go for the jugular. I agree with that call. I think he had the flexibility in that situation to go for it. But then you go for it, and the play call is pretty much dialing up every receiver to go 10-plus yards deep. And so Jaylen Herz has to sit back in the pocket and wait for this deep play to develop when all you needed was 3 yards. And I get maybe some routes you have going deep, 10-plus yards down the field, but you didn't have a single option for Jaylen to just pick up those 3 yards that you need. And again, this isn't all on Nick Sirianni. We can't give Kellen Moore all the credit for the play calls that are good and none of the blame for the ones that are bad. That's on Kellen Moore too. So this is on both Nick and Kellen The play design was just far too aggressive. Again, they were trying to go for the kill and just kind of were arrogant and just disrespected their opponent way too early in this football game. You had to have some sort of out for Jaylen. It's only 4th and 3. It's not, a 3rd and 16 situation like you had against Cincinnati the week before. It wasn't even like later on in the game when it's 3rd and 22 and you get that touchdown to Devontae Smith. So I thought the decision there was fine, but the play call was just far too aggressive. So that's what happened in that first decision. The next one was a 2-point conversion off of that penalty. You score on the Saquon Barkley wheel route. You're up 16-0 in the second quarter. And yeah, the penalty now puts you on the 1-yard line, and you like Jaylen Hertz's chances with the tush-push on the 1 against anybody. But the logic to go up 18 instead of 17 just makes no sense. Because since you didn't get it, now the Jaguars are only down 2 scores instead of 3. Why wouldn't you just take the field goal to go up 17? Instead, it's 16-0. 2 touchdowns and 2-point conversions for Jacksonville ties the game. So I agree with the push call. Even though it didn't work, I disagree with the decision. It just, again, that's what I'm talking about. That's just being aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. The in-game situation did not call for that. 1 point puts you up by 3 scores. So I think he was 0 for 2. The next one was a 2-point conversion. You're up 22-0 in the third quarter. This one I don't hate, actually, because if you get it, you go back up 24. And the play call I liked as well. So this was the one decision in these situations that I actually agreed with Nick. So far he's 1 for 3. Then you have a 4th down and 1. It's 22-16 with 1 minute left in the third quarter. To me, I know, again, it's 4th and 1. And I'll never be super upset if Nick goes for it on 4th and short, regardless of the situation. I would have preferred to take the field goal, and then you go up 2 scores, 25-16, with 1 quarter left to play, the way your defense was playing. The Jaguars only made it 22-16 off of a fluke touchdown that shouldn't have counted because Saquon Barkley was tripped. He was down by contact, but I digress. I would have took the points, so I disagreed with the decision a little bit, but I understood it. But the play call was terrible. Again, they were getting way too cute. Sometimes too aggressive, sometimes too cute. Just make it simple. That's what I love about the push, is so many NFL teams make things overcomplicated. I like that the Eagles say in 1 or 2 yard situations, we're just going to jam our quarterback up the middle, and we always get it like 90% of the time. Here on 4th and 1, again, I want the field goal. I understand the call, though. Just use the push. Like 1 yard, it always works. You fake the push. You do a play-action rollout. You cut the field in half for Jaylen Herz. He only has 2 options, and there's nowhere to go. So he's 1 for 4 again. In these situations, it's like when I kind of can understand the decision to go for it, they just get so weird in their play call decisions. And then when the play call makes sense, I think the situation to go for it doesn't make any sense. So it was never in sync. None of these decisions were ever married, and they made much logical sense as a complete whole. So you have another 2-point conversion. It's 28-16 with 7 minutes and 43 seconds to go. You're trying to go up by 14 again, which, again, that makes sense. But maybe if you took the extra points in all of these other situations before, you wouldn't be needing to play this catch-up with the points. You would need to go for it again. So I understand the decision to go for it in this context, but you kind of put yourself in that situation by not taking the points before. But again, you didn't do that. The past is the past. In this situation, I understand. Go for it. They do a shotgun RPO play on the 1 yard line where Jaylen Herz keeps it. Like, what are these play calls, Kellen Moore? Nick Sirianni? I know Nick likes to take over in a lot of these 4th down situations, red zone play calling. He has his hands all over that. Kellen Moore deserves a lot of the blame too. Like, why are they getting so cute, aggressive? I think they were just arrogant against Jacksonville. I really do think they didn't respect the Jaguars enough and they overlooked them. And that's why all these decisions just were not right. There wasn't a single decision, again, where I liked both the call to go for it and the play design. I always hated one or the other. And that's unacceptable. Like, you can't do that against the Dallas Cowboys. You certainly can't do that against the Washington Commanders next Thursday. You're not going to be able to do it against the Detroit Lions in the playoffs, or if you play the San Francisco 49ers. The Eagles need more from Nick Sirianni when it comes to these gotta-have-it calls. And he has fallen short, I think, for years now in these areas. I like that he's aggressive, but there's a difference. Dan Orlovsky said it best. There's a difference between aggressive and reckless. There has to be logic behind the aggression. It has to make sense for the situation. And Nick right now just, again, I said it the other day on the show, I think this team has a Super Bowl ceiling, but I don't think their head coach has a Super Bowl ceiling. And it's because of these in-game decisions that I'm very nervous about when it comes time to play great teams in January. I think these decisions could be the difference. Again, if you do what you did against Jacksonville and you're down 5, and the Lions have the ball instead of the Jaguars or the 49ers do, or Matt Stafford and the Rams, or name anybody, even Jaden Daniels, I think it come back to bite you a whole lot more than it has based on the opponents that you've played. So, again, those decisions, some of them I agreed with, most of them I didn't. And if I did agree with the decision, the play call was just lacking logic. It was all about aggression and going for the kill when I don't think it called for that in the moment. So that's where I stand with those decisions against Jacksonville. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on X at LockedOnBirds, at DiBiase, LOE. We'll wrap up the show coming up next with what's more likely right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 back in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Just take the over on Devontae Smith's receiving yards. I've been hitting money on those bets the last few games. An anytime touchdown for Saquon Barkley or Jaylen Herz has felt pretty good over the last few games. Do it all over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, guys, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles with what's more likely, and this one comes from Jason, who hits up our Gmail account. You guys can always ask questions on X, our YouTube community page, but we also do have an email, very old school, but lockedoneaglespodcast@gmail.com. And this what's more likely has to do with the extensions or the looming free agency of 3 defensive players. So Jason asks, what's more likely, Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, or Zack Baun? If just one of them gets an extension in the 2025 offseason, who would it be? And this is a really, really good question. And I hope the Eagles pay at least 2 of these guys. I would want them to pay Josh Sweat or Milton Williams and then make sure Zack Baun gets a contract extension. I'll believe it when I see it, that Zack Baun or any Eagles linebacker gets an extension from Howie Roseman. So I'm hoping that's the result, is at least one of those linemen and Baun gets paid. I think there's a chance all 3 could get paid. I think there's a chance that none of them do. It's really up in the air for sure. But all 3 are playing at a very high level right now. Josh Sweat, 2 sacks against Jacksonville. He's already at 5 this year, on pace for his second double-digit sack season in 2 years. Milton Williams is the 6th highest graded pass rusher on the interior of anybody, according to Pro Football Focus. Zack Baun has been a top 5 linebacker in the entire NFL this year. So it makes sense. They all need new contracts. The elephant in the room is, will any of them stay in Philadelphia this year? And it's very important that Howie makes sure he does keep some of these guys in-house. You got to stay disciplined, of course. You can't pay everybody. But 2022, after that season, I thought Howie, he let, I think, too many players walk out the door on defense, and you saw how much it backfired in 2023. So I do hope he pays at least 1 or 2 of these guys. If I had to say he only pays 1, I would probably say it's Milton Williams. And that's the guy that I would want them to pay to the most if I could only have one of the 3. He's the youngest of the 3. He plays a premier position. Jordan Davis, to me, is showing that he's not going to become a pass rusher or a consistent one that you can rely on in all 3 downs, every situation. I don't think he's an every down player. He's not a Jalen Carter or a Fletcher Cox. Like, I think Jordan Davis is who he is. It's year 3, and he's a very good run stopper, and that's who he is. So I think that makes Milton's role even more important. And as I mentioned before, he has become a top-tier pass rusher from an efficiency metric standpoint. I know they have Moro Ijoma, and he looks great this year, and maybe that gives you the flexibility to be disciplined and not pay Milton on the open market. And I think he'll get a pretty sizable deal, whether it's in Philly or with another team. But I would want it to be Milton Williams, a young, elite pass rusher on the inside. That's a player you don't want leaving the building. So Josh Sweat, look, he's still in his prime. I think he's having a great year. I think he's vastly underrated. I would love to keep him and have that rotation of Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Bryce Huff, and then maybe you draft somebody early. You got Jalix Hunt as well. It's a good free agent class. But I do think Sweat could command a contract in free agency that's too much for Howie to counter. I don't know. I think because, again, he's still in his prime. As I mentioned, this could be 2 double-digit sack seasons in 3 years. They didn't pay Hassan Reddick. It's a good edge class in both the draft and in free agency. As I mentioned, you've got Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt under contract. I don't know. I feel like Josh Sweat may price himself out of Philadelphia. It might just be too rich for Howie. I think Howie would want Sweat back. He likes to keep his guys he drafted long-term. Again, Sweat's a good player. But I do think on the open market, NFL teams love to pay good, productive linemen, pass rushers, especially if they're in their prime. So I think Josh Sweat will probably get overpaid in free agency. Milton Williams could too, but again, Milton is younger. He plays a premier position on the inside. He's a good pass rusher. You need that with Jordan Davis's kind of stagnant development. And again, it's a good edge class in the draft, and Howie does have some young players there. So I think there's a good chance that both could be in Philly in 2025. But if I had to choose one gets paid, I would want it to be Milton Williams, and I think it would be Milton. I think most people would agree, though, of the 3, they would want Zack Baun to stay, but I think he is the least likely of all 3 to get a contract. Again, it's just based on the past. I'll believe how he gives a linebacker an extension when I see it. I mean, when was the last time that happened? I think Nigel Bradham, right? He got a 1-year extension after 2018. But outside of Nigel Bradham's 1-year deal, like, he just doesn't pay linebackers. And I mentioned this on the show the other day, last week. I wonder if Baun's success, it might show him, yeah, hey, I made a mistake after 2022 letting TJ Edwards and Kazir White go. I need to learn from that and pay Baun, keep him with Nakobe Dean long term, who also, Nakobe's going to need a new contract after next year. But I wonder if he's going to say, actually, this is 2 of 3 years now where I've nailed the bargain bin shopping at linebacker. I can do it again. I don't need to pay Baun. I got to pay Nakobe anyway next year. I'm not giving out 2 extensions to linebacker. I'll do 1. I wonder what way he's going to go. I really, really hope that Baun gets a deal. I think of the 3, he's the least likely. But I hope there's at least 2 guys that get a contract. One of those linemen and Baun. But if 2 of the 3 get paid, I might say it's actually Sweat and Williams. But I don't know. It's a good situation to have these players playing as well as they are. And I do hope they keep at least 1 or 2 in-house heading into 2025. Again, I understand you can't keep everybody. You've got draft picks. You got a lot of young players that could replace some of these guys in the long term. But learn from 2022. I think Howie went too far in letting that whole defense walk. Like, he let Chauncey Gardner-Johnson go. He let TJ Edwards go. He let Kazir White go. He let Javon Hargrave go. There was a lot of talent that went out the door. And I think he's done a good job of replenishing that through the draft. But at the same time, 2023, you were held back a lot by your defensive personnel. So I hope some of these guys get paid. If one gets paid, though, based on the question, Jason, I would say it's Milton Williams. So interesting question, though, for sure. They're all playing at a very, very high level. This entire defense is. In fact, the Eagles are the only team in football right now with a top 6 offense and defense from an EPA standpoint. They are playing. They're all clicking. Everything's clicking on all 3 cylinders, offense, defense, and special teams. They just need Nick Sirianni to not overlook the Dallas Cowboys We'll get into that matchup more tomorrow on Crossover Thursday with Marcus Moser of Locked On Cowboys. Until then, we're signing off. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go, Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.